The battle against ISIS in Iraq's second largest city officially ended 9 months ago. But inside the old city, the corpses of civilians and fighters alike rot in the open, others partially concealed by rubble, further traumatizing the surviving population. Authorities seem unwilling to take responsibility for removing the dead, many of whom are former ISIS fighters.
This is not my job. This another agency will make some investigation about that.
Volunteers from the community have stepped in. It's grueling and dangerous work. As the bodies decompose, human rights groups worry that evidence of war crimes will be destroyed. In one scene, what appears to be dozens of bodies were discovered piled on top of one another in the basement of a blown-out building.
Teams saying more than 100 just in here. It's the most horrific thing I've ever seen.
When journalists illustrate the real cost and aftermath of war using gruesome images, how much is too much? Seb Walker was the reporter on that Vice documentary. And Seb Walker joins us now from our Washington Bureau. Thanks for joining us, sir. Remarkable piece of journalism to watch, and yet, as you say in the piece, the war has been over for some time. Why has it taken this long for the story to come forward?
Yeah, John, I mean, we were pretty surprised, to be honest, at the scenes that we found going back to Mosul. I mean, we covered the entire conflict from the first day to the last, and this was the first time we'd been back since hostilities ended. Really, this was meant to be a piece about reconstruction. We were going back to see, what families are going through who've had their homes destroyed, like how you rebuild, and kind of trying to understand that process. But very quickly, when we got on the ground, we saw the scale of the bodies that are still strewn amongst the rubble. And this is a huge hindrance to rebuilding. They can't actually rebuild houses until they clear those bodies out of there. So this was kind of the starting point for us. And then we had a great local crew. We had a fixer who was from Mosul. So we basically tried to find one of these volunteer body collecting teams and go around the city profiling them as they did their work.
It's obviously a difficult story to tell, and it's a difficult story for an audience to watch. How do you balance the need to show the reality, the gruesome reality of what's going on there, and to still meet the conventions of journalism the way it's told?
Well, I mean, I think it's our job on this show, and it's something our audience expects, is that we go to these places and, come back and report the reality of what's going on the ground in the most accurate and impactful way that we can. So certainly, going to a place like this, I mean, there has been a lot of imagery that's been coming out of Syria and Yemen and even the conflict from Mosul itself. And to some extent, I think there's a certain apathy towards these kinds of stories. So, I mean, my job isn't really to kind of sanitize that. It's to represent the reality on the ground. And I think, anything other than that does a disservice to the families that we feature in our piece. This is what they are having to deal with. The scale of the bodies that you see in our story is the reality of life in Mosul right now. So I think it's important that people understand that. And, if you watch that piece and if it's something that you feel outraged and saddened for the families that are still living there, then I think that means that we've done our job.
It is difficult to watch. It must be obviously much more difficult to have been on the ground. Does telling a story like this take any personal toll on you?
I mean, I think that's a really good question. It's something that people are asking a lot more these days from when I started doing this. I mean, we're lucky enough to have the tools and support with our show to help us process these kinds of experiences that we have on the ground. But I mean, my response to these questions is always that, as journalists, we're privileged to be able to go to these places and report on this, and then when the story's over, we're able to leave and go back to our homes. The people who are really, dealing with the worst of this are the families and the people of Mosul. So it's certainly something that's very difficult to report on. But we had a very experienced team with us. We've been to these kinds of places a lot. We've reported on that conflict throughout, every stage of the actual battle for Mosul. So. yeah, it was a very, very tough one to report, and the scene in that room was absolutely horrific. But I mean, we do have the ability to be able to kind of leave at the end of the day, and that's something that I see as a privilege.
Seb Walker, keep up the good work. Thanks for your time.